I'd like to thank you for joining us today at our quarterly budget committee meeting on April 22nd. And I'm going to turn it over to Gary at this point.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome everyone to our quarterly budget meeting today on Wednesday, April 22nd, 2020. We're conducting this remotely by Zoom, as you know. Some quick housekeeping items. Kevin Moss will be our facilitator today, so he will help coordinate the meeting as far as when you'd like to speak. When you would like to speak, if you would please use the raise hand function on Zoom, and it will say that on the participants list. And if that's not easy to understand, then like literally wave your hand on the screen and we'll catch you. Please mute yourself when you're not talking. And then for the committee members, please keep your videos on at all times, but those who are not speaking, staff, you turn off your cameras when you're not speaking. This is being recorded and it will be online as soon as the meeting ends. Please remember, for the committee members, you are on camera the entire time, unless you choose to mute your video. So your face will be shown the entire meeting, not just when you're speaking. So keep that in mind as you are on the screen. But most of you, I'm sure, have done these before. We're getting to be experts at Zoom meetings. There's other staff on the line from Public and Government Affairs. That's the CLACCO TV. They're just helping with the recording. And Kevin Galusha is a member of our Technology Services staff, if you're wondering who those names are. Let's do introductions. And because it's difficult on Zoom, I'll just call your name, and if you could say hello that you're here. We'll start with the commissioners. Chair Bernard.
Here. Hello.
Yeah. Commissioner Chavez.
Hello, I'm here.
Commissioner Schrader.
Here.
Commissioner Humberston.
Here.
Commissioner Fisher.
Absent. Just kidding.
And our public members, Wilda.
Here.
Jan.
Here.
Sean.
I'm here. Good morning.
Okay. On.
I'm here.
And Tom. Has Tom joined yet? No. So currently we're missing Tom, but hopefully he'll be with us shortly. I'll ask Elizabeth Comfort, our interim finance director. First, hi, Elizabeth.
Good morning.
You could quickly introduce your budget team who is online.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I'd like to introduce our budget team 2020. We have Todd Burton with us. He is a retired finance extraordinaire with a long history, 35 years in budgeting and government accounting. So we welcome him to help guide us through this budget year. We also have Blaze Riggins. He's new to the county, but also brings a deep bench of expertise that we have tapped into. We also have Jeanne Yang. She is a longtime Clackamas County budget analyst with us, and also Roxanne Fisher, 19 years with the county in this role. So we have a very deep bench in the department, as well as we've asked Doug Waugh, who is with Wes. He is also joining our budget team 2020 to help see us through. He brings that Clackamas County department experience to give us additional guidance. So I am just pleased and proud to work with each of these as we are presenting and building the new year budget.
Excellent. Thank you, Elizabeth. And we'll hear more from the budget team in a moment. And then we have Heather Pedersen from our Human Resources Department, who will be presenting the Compensation Board for Elected Officials report. So hello, Heather. Welcome to you. Before we start, I want to quickly share, and I think most of you know this, but if not, I do have very sad news to report that a member of our team has passed away, and that's Haley Fish. Passed away this past weekend. You all worked with her. She was Deputy Finance Director at Clackamas County. She helped prepare our budgets for the last 2 fiscal years and brought incredible talent and professionalism to her work. And we're just tragically sad about her loss. So if you didn't know that, I'm sorry to have broken that to you now, but those of you, I think most of you knew that. And we're just very, very sad for her and her family and for all of us. So we send our deep thoughts to her family and all of those of us who had the opportunity to work with her. So with that, Chair, if you're okay, we'll move on with the agenda. We do have a full agenda. We have 2 hours with you today, and we'll get through as much as we can. So we'll start with the Compensation Board for Elected Officials. Committee, you will remember last year, you did ask that we do this report prior to the preparation of the budget proposal so that whatever decisions you make can be incorporated in the budget. So that's why we're bringing this to you now in April before your hearings begin. Heather Pedersen is Class and Compensation Manager in Human Resources and is a staff liaison for the Compensation Board. So she has submitted documents to you in advance. But Heather, if you'd like to give a quick presentation, and then we'll go to discussion.
Gary?
Oh, yes, Tom. Hi, Tom.
Hi. Well, I finally got in. I had a little trouble logging on. I just have a brief comment. I think you just commented on the passing of Haley, but I had planned to say something brief if I could do that.
Yes, please.
All right. I just want to take a brief moment to note the tragic passing of Haley Fish last weekend and ask that we find comfort in the fact that she has left her earthly troubles and concerns behind, that she's now in a better place, and finally her soul is at rest. For those that she left behind me, they find peace knowing that she's in a better place. And I would also encourage those left behind to avail themselves of numerous resources in the community that deal with these troubling issues at an already very troubling time. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, very much, and welcome to our meeting. Would anyone else like to say anything about Haley? I didn't mean to rush through that so quickly, but if anyone else would like to speak. Sean, go ahead. Sorry, Kevin.
Just to say, I'm just as sorry as I can be. She was young. She was hardworking. She was very talented, and I'm just as sorry as I can be for her family and friends and all of her coworkers I know who are probably devastated by the loss. So thank you for letting me say that.
Yeah, I just like to add, I enjoyed Haley quite a bit. I had nothing but good memories. I liked her directness and her ability to answer questions, and she'll be sorely missed.
Would anyone else like to speak about Haley? Okay, thank you all. So with that, Heather, if you please present the Compensation Board for Elected Officials report.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, commissioners and citizen committee members. I know that you have the PowerPoint presentation up in front of you, and I'll be going through that. And if you have any questions, I'm on an iPad, so I can't see everyone, but certainly speak up or raise your hand, and Kevin can unmute you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. As Gary mentioned, my name is Heather Pedersen. I'm the county's classification and compensation manager. I am the staff liaison to the Compensation Board, but I certainly don't do it by myself. I have staff that do all the collection of information and assembly. Nina Smith and Aaron Brayman are a really valuable part of this team, and I couldn't do it without them. The citizen members of the Compensation Board this year, I'd like to acknowledge them real quickly. Gary Martin served as chair this year. Gary is a retiree with over 27 years of experience in human resources. He served as the HR director for Portland State University, as well as the Oregon court system. And this was actually Gary's 5th year serving on the Compensation Board for elected officials, the beginning of his 2nd term. Elisa Grandy, this was her 3rd year on the Compensation Board for elected officials. She had over 12 years of experience in HR management and compensation with the Home Depot before she ventured out to other business opportunities. And last but not least, Colleen Wilson. This was her 2nd year on the Compensation Board for elected officials. And she has over 30 years of experience in HR, payroll, and compensation management. And she's currently the HR director for Princeton Property Management. Kevin, if you want to go to the next slide, I'm ready for that. Thank you. The role of the Compensation Board for elected officials, and I know for many of you this will be a repeat, But the compensation board for elected officials is guided by Oregon Revised Statute 204.112. And that outlines the annual process for the compensation board and gives these boards authority to review the compensation of elected officials and make recommendations to a county's budget committee. The statute provides general guidelines and considerations regarding how the compensation board determines their recommendations, including the review of comparable positions within the labor market and consideration of factors such as internal alignment within an organization as well as compression. The ORS also provides more specific direction for the sheriff, and that direction states that the sheriff's salary shall be fixed in an amount which is not less than any member of the sheriff's department. That's a very broad definition, and so our county's compensation board has historically interpreted that to mean that the sheriff shall make at least $1 more per month than the highest paid undersheriff. The methodology that the compensation board uses and has adopted includes collecting market data from comparable jurisdictions and adjusting that data as appropriate. The labor market used by this compensation board includes Clark, Deschutes, Lane, Marion, Multnomah, and Washington counties, the cities of Portland and Vancouver, as well as Metro Regional Government. And in 2018, the compensation board also began looking at the Oregon Judicial Department for matches to our Justice of the Peace. The compensation board's recommendations are aimed to bring the elected positions up to market average. Internal alignment with an elected official's second in command is also considered, and recommendations made as needed. So that brings us to the recommendations of the compensation board this year for fiscal year 2021. For fiscal year 2021, the compensation board's recommendations are intended to bring, as I mentioned, those positions that are below market average to market parity, or to address where there is compression or risk of compression with the second in command. As outlined in the full report that I know you received and is in your packet, 6 of the 7 elected official positions are recommended to receive increases this year. So I'm going to go through those. The position of assessor was found to be 6.2% below market, and therefore a 6.2% increase is recommended to bring that position to market parity. You may recall that last year, the assessor received a 9% increase. The position of clerk was found to be 5.2% below market this year, and so a 5.2% increase is recommended this year. Last year, a 2.7% increase was approved by the budget committee. This year, commissioner is 2.6% below market, and therefore a 2.6% increase is recommended. Last year, you may recall, the compensation board recommended a 5.5% increase, and the budget committee approved a 3.5% increase. This year, the district attorney is 0.6% below market. However, there is some salary compression with one of the chief DDAs, which is second in command. If there is a non-represented COLA approved this year, it would be 2.6% COLA. And if that were to occur, then the salary of that second in command would be 2.8% above the district attorney. The recommended increase, and I apologize because on your PowerPoint presentation, it does say that the increase of, the recommended increase of 15.79% says that it represents a 3% overall increase, and that is not correct. It represents a 4.8% overall increase. And so what the compensation board with the district attorney, a large portion of the DA's salary is paid by the state. And so the county portion is smaller, and that is all that this compensation board has authority to change or recommended change to. And so because they recognize that if there were a COLA for the non-represented second in command, and it would be 2.8% under market. They're recommending a 2.8% overall increase and then an additional 2% increase on top of that, so that there is some room between the DA and the second in command. So the recommendation is for a 4.8% overall increase, but to the county portion, which is all that they can recommend for, it is a 15.79% increase, which gets you a 4.8% overall increase. The justice of the peace was found to be 9.7% below market this year. A 9.7% increase, excuse me, I just want to mention that there was no increase recommended last year for justice of the peace. And finally, for the treasurer, a 2.7% increase is recommended, which is where they were below market. The compensation board this year did not recommend an increase for sheriff. This year, the sheriff was found to be 13.2% above market. And I know a few of these increases seem large, especially when we had increases last year. I do want to recognize that 3 of our positions are matched to positions, elected positions in Deschutes County. And in the last year, Deschutes County provided pretty significant increases for their assessor, clerk, and justice of the peace. Pretty significant, 19.6 for assessor, clerk. They provided a 16.8% increase, and for justice of the peace, a 23% increase. And so for those positions, that's why you're seeing, the averaged out to be farther below market. And for the district attorney, we had a couple counties, Clark County and Washington County, also provided pretty large increases for their district attorney, which is pulling us down a little bit. So that is my presentation for you, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have. Before we do that, I'd like to thank the citizen members again of the Compensation Board for Elected Officials, Gary, Colleen, and Elisa. As you can imagine, like you're experiencing right now, we started meeting in early March and had several meetings, and some in person, some over the phone. And so I just want to thank them. So I appreciate your time. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Chair Bernard, and then Budget Member Caldwell.
So I had an opportunity to speak to all the elected officials, excluding the sheriff, today. And as leaders of the community and in this time of crisis, none of them would accept an increase at this time. Should the county turn around, they would appreciate an opportunity to revisit this later in the year. But for now, all of them have declined the increase at this time. I just want to let you know. I've also talked to all the commissioners, and while I did not poll them, they're welcome to talk too. Thanks.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Sean.
Just a couple comments. I was going to say that the $14,000 on the chart for the commissioner's salary, I'm assuming that was all 5 combined and not individual.
Correct. That's correct. Yes.
Just wanted to clarify that. The other question I had about the district attorney, does the state not provide any increase in compensation? It looks like the county is picking up the entire 4.8 for all of the salary. Is that correct?
Right. The state does provide increases. I don't know if there's a regular schedule for that, but we survey them annually when we are preparing for our compensation board for elected officials. Some years they have, some years they haven't. So I'm not positive if they tie it to anything like a CPI. But there is no regular schedule. It doesn't happen always on July 1, like we would.
The other thing I wanted to say, just as an alternative, and I understand Chair Bernard, what you were saying about people not wanting to take an increase in this time. I just, as an alternative, I'll just throw out the idea that people can donate any increase back to the county as a whole, to a particular program, to any other, appropriate use for that additional money. I'm just throwing that out. So thank you.
Right. Mr. Chair, you have Commissioner Savas and Commissioner Humberton, and then Jan Lee.
Yeah, I just want to thank our compensation board and our staff that did all the work to do this. And Heather, I appreciate your comments. When I first discovered how in local government, how some of this was done 20 something years ago in the water district, it became apparent that, and you mentioned Deschutes County, if one jurisdiction makes a substantial change or increase, then that just kind of that ripple effect just continually seems to kind of grow. And I'll never forget, frankly, the first couple, 3 years of digging into this deeper, how that really took place on a particular water district or local water districts, where we start comparing ourselves to one another. And so it kind of has this effect of spiraling the pay, whether you're looking at elected officials or you're looking at paid or salaried positions or positions within your organization. That pay scale analysis just seems to be something that it's kind of a micro market, if you will, of the local area, but it's not necessarily always tied to or reflective of what the private sector is. While some would argue that the private sector pay is higher in areas or lower in areas, I won't dispute that, but I was always taken aback by one jurisdiction. I can't remember where it was and what state it was, but where they basically base their pay on the average income of their constituents, the average family wage income or individual income. So I thought that was interesting approach. But anyhow, I do want to just recognize the hard work. If hearing Commissioner Bernard state what the elected officials were, he did call me this morning and inform me of that. I would concur with that. But I do want to just say that your work is appreciated. We use it at times, and it's a good measurement. It's a good exercise. So I would encourage that we continue to do that, despite the fact that apparently this year we may not do that at all as far as the increases. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're muted, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Humberton.
Thank you. I appreciate Heather's work and her team's work on this, and I agree with the rationale that you use in terms of market and all of that. But I also take a look at where we are financially and where the rest of this community is right now, and our staff. We've had to lay off some people because we lost funding for what they do, and we have about 150 vacancies that we have to maintain in order to balance our budget, along with the fact that we did not hire somewhere between 500 and 700 temporary employees. And we have, for the last 6 months, asked every one of our divisions to tighten their belt in preparation for what we had anticipated to be a tight budget in the first place, and has gotten even tighter as a result of the COVID-19. So speaking for myself, I cannot in good conscience accept a pay raise at this time. When things turn around, it becomes a different question. But I think we need to set a leadership example. We have to tighten our belts also. And so I will state publicly that my vote will be to not accept it at this time. I have no problem revisiting it in the future when the economy turns around and people are back to work. But at this point, I would have to say no. Thank you.
Jan, you're muted. Jan, you're muted.
I was thinking that Kevin was muting and unmuting, sorry. I just want to thank all the public officials for their generosity in this difficult time and look forward to revisiting this in the future.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Fisher.
Commissioner Fisher.
Yeah, thank you. So as you all know from last year, I'm a real advocate to stick with the experts and go with the compensation board's recommendations as a whole, because I really value and respect the expertise of that. But I do agree with everyone that at this time it's not appropriate or prudent or responsible to be taking increases for any of us. But I do like Sean's idea. I want to acknowledge that, of donating back the increase. My concern would be that the transaction cost of coordinating all of that might be just overly cumbersome. And I don't know. I mean, it might be good. I'm concerned about the district attorney. I don't want, oh, sorry about that. I'm getting notified of other meetings here. Let me shut that down. Now, where was I before I was interrupted with my alert?
District attorney.
Oh, yeah, I think that it's important that the district attorney be above anybody that's not insubordinate, but at a different classification. So that's a concern of mine. So that's just all I'm going to say. I'm going to go with the good of the order with this, but I just wanted to say that.
And back to you, Mr. Chair.
I also want to thank the compensation board for the work they do. We have to consider the budget as a whole. And I am also concerned about the DA position. I'm also concerned that I have actually a question of Heather, right, Peterson?
Yep.
And that is, who determines the pay of the undersheriff?
Well, the pay of the undersheriff is like any other employee. It's a salary range or grade that's assigned based on market data and information, as well as internal alignment. And so where the undersheriffs are placed within the salary grade would be when they're appointed by the sheriff, and then they're eligible for performance increases just like any other employee. So the actual salary grade is determined by class and comp. We would make a recommendation to the county administrator, who would review and have the authority to approve that salary grade assignment. And then just like any other employee, their supervisor, the person they report to, has the authority to place them within that salary grade.
All right, and that explains why the sheriff might be 12% high. And that was my question, but anyway, so are we going to vote on this? Will this require? Okay, so.
Yeah, first I'd like to thank Heather. She always does a great job with this.
Thank you.
And originally when I read it, I was going to support it because I didn't want to get yelled at again by Sonia. But I think Jim's got some excellent points, and it'll come out later in our discussion of the financial plan, but we really don't know the impact of the COVID issue yet. The state is going to be hurt very badly with income tax receipts. So I would move at this point, we delay consideration of the report for a period of 6 months.
So is there, I'm looking at Gary or Chair Bernard, is there a mechanism where we can officially revisit this perhaps in January, or just?
I don't think there's any issue with revisiting.
Okay.
It would be an adjustment that I would say we would make. It's far less than 10%.
Yeah.
It's rather insignificant. But as far as I know, Elizabeth would probably be the budget. I don't think there's an issue with bringing it.
Yeah, the overall cost is minimal compared to the size of the general fund. It's nothing.
Mr. Chairman, I heard that as a motion, so if that was in fact intended to be a motion, I would second it.
Okay. It was intended to, and that is to delay acceptance of the report for 6 months and to review it again in 6 months. And so any further discussion?
Yeah, I have a technical question, I guess, a process question. Gary, looking to you, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that we're specifically not meeting as the budget committee in a budget committee capacity, that we're meeting in preparation for the budget. So is it appropriate for the budget committee to be vote on anything per se? Because I was under the standing that the quarterly meetings were more informational. So just a technicality, but I want to make sure we're within the guidelines of the law.
Yes, so I'll ask Heather's input on making sure we're meeting the statutory requirements of this committee. But the budget committee does meet quarterly and more often if you choose. You can't deliberate on the budget itself until such time as the budget is published. That is the law. But like you're doing today, you're making a decision that will then be placed into the budget later. So I guess my point is, yes, you can make this decision in 6 months, but Heather, is that correct?
Yeah, so when we had discussed doing this portion of the recommendations during a budget committee meeting rather than the official budget hearing, Stephen Madcore, County Council, did weigh in on that and said that this was an appropriate forum to do that in. He, the ORS does not say you have to do it at an official budget hearing. It just says you have to make the recommendations to the budget committee. And whether you make a decision today or you make it at the official hearings, I don't think it speaks to that at all.
And I believe the governor signed some relaxing of the public meeting law, and I'm pretty sure that this is something we can do. Any further discussion?
Wilda Parks had something, Mr. Chair.
Wilda.
Yeah, I just wondered if there's concern about the district attorney's salary being at least, above his next in command, if that's something that we might want to look at sooner than the 6 months. I agree with the 6 months. I think that's appropriate. But there's been concern mentioned about the DA's position, so I just wanted to double check on that. And then also, if I recall correctly, at some of our quarterly meetings in the past, we've taken various votes, but I'm not sure it's on the same kind of level, because I remember when we took a vote at a quarterly meeting about opening up the jail beds, but I think we had discussed that prior to that, but just reinforced it. So I'm not sure. I'm just trying to make sure we're doing things the way they're supposed to be done.
So I'd like to add that I did talk to the only candidate running for DA, and he was in agreement with not taking it, as well as the DA.
Commissioner Fisher, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Fisher.
Yeah, I just want to say I really like Tom's motion to look at this in 6 months, because then we can really look at the district attorney. We can get information about when does the state increase happen, what is it in totality, and look at it at that time. We really don't have all the information, and I would much rather err on the side of respecting the elected officials' position at this point.
All right, any? Pardon?
I said, so Sonia and I are still friends.
I just heard from Stephen Madcore, our county council. He said we're fine to delay. You're fine to delay this for 6 months. You can make this decision in 6 months at a quarterly budget meeting. So you're totally appropriate to do that.
Okay, Kevin, please poll us.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Member Lee. Jan Lee.
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Savis.
Aye.
Member Feely.
Aye.
On Lee.
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader.
Aye.
Okay. Sean.
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher.
Aye.
Wilda.
Yes.
Commissioner Humbertson?
Aye.
Am I missing anyone before I, Chair Bernard?
Aye.
Am I missing anyone from?
Did you ask Tom? Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
So I think we got everyone, and
All right. That is unanimous. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. So we'll bring this back to you in 6 months from now, which, if my math is correct, is October 2020.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather.
Bye-bye.
All right. We will move on. For the rest of our agenda, I'll ask our interim finance director, Elizabeth Comfort, to lead. I will support her as needed, as well as the budget staff to answer your questions and give you updates. So we'll start with the impacts to our budget on COVID-19, and there are impacts. So I'll ask Elizabeth to please to take it away from here.
Thank you, and good morning, and thank you for having me here as your interim finance director, and welcome budget committee members and commissioners. The next thing on our agenda is to just give you an overview of the budget impacts and how the county is experiencing COVID-19. We are tracking expenses for FEMA and for our internal purposes. Right now, the county is tracking a variety of different ways of how the county is experiencing either additional expenditures or changing in deployment and how the dollars for staffing are being spent. The total expenditure impact on COVID-19 at this time is $2,710,000. Those are not all new dollars. Those are impacted of our COVID leave for personnel or additional emergency operations center expenditures, and our H3S, which is housing, human, and
Health, housing, and human services.
Thank you. And health being most critical of the COVID impact. So those are being tracked. So we're tracking them in direct expenses. We have contracts that we've had to set up, about 8 of those for known expenditures we're tracking. Different departments, in addition to H3S, we also have the NCPRD and WES that are tracking direct impact expenditures. So we are seeing this throughout, and I would like to ask Gary to talk about one department, our tourism, that is particularly being impacted by this event that we're having worldwide.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. And committee members, you may have seen this already in the news, or you've heard of it through our communications. Our Tourism and Cultural Affairs Department, as you know, is funded 100% by transient room tax, which is what, when people stay in hotels, they pay this tax that goes to the hotels and in turn is given to tourism-related organizations. And for Clackamas County, that is us, our Tourism and Cultural Affairs Department. Tourism is all but stopped worldwide, and that is certainly the case here in Clackamas County. Our TRT has gone down to 0 as of March 1st, and at this point there are no indications of when that will begin again, our tourism industry around the world. So because that department is entirely funded by the transient room tax, and because that tax is gone, the revenue stream is gone, we've had to make a very, very difficult decision, and that is, as of next week, May 4th, 11 of the 13 members of that department are being laid off. The department itself is being disbanded and will become a program within the county administration department. And we are going to use the reserves that are in that department to help support the unemployment costs of those employees who are no longer able to work, as well as to pay the remainder of several contracts that we've had to cancel or end because of this loss in revenue. And overall, it's just very, very sad that we've had to do this to a highly functioning team, a very, very effective group of staff who have worked really diligently and successfully to advance tourism and cultural affairs here within the county and the region. So because this was a choice, we didn't have any choice to make. There was a complete loss in revenues, and there's no indication of when it will grow back again. So that is one immediate impact of COVID-19 on county government. Again, very, very sad for these really competent employees, high-performing employees who, through no fault of their own, they're now not able to work at Clackamas County. We're calling this a temporary decision. We know that when the tourism industry picks up again, the intent is to reform this department and bring back as many of these employees who wish to come back, to reinstate them to where they were at and to begin redo the fine work of that department. But this is just one example of an immediate decision we've had to make because of this total loss of revenue. And then quickly, other departments are impacted as well. The next one I would say is business and community services. North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District is within that department. State park fees are zero. Our lottery dollars, which fund many programs within that department, have stopped. And so all of our seasonal employees in the North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District have been given notice that there is no work for them to do. That's approximately 130 seasonal temporary employees. So this is having an impact on our organization, no question about that. Those are just two recent examples I can offer to you. That's my update. If you have any specific questions about that, happy to answer now, or I'll let Elizabeth continue.
I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
I tried to get this to raise my hand, but so how are we maintaining the parks?
That's a well, that's a great question. And most of so we have the North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District and county parks that we maintain outside of that district. There's still staff doing work. We're not entirely stopped. Most of the parks, the playground equipment are closed, where we're asking people, please don't congregate on that equipment. The aquatic park is closed. The Milwaukee Center is having some temporary closures. We're still providing meals for those who need it. Some of our trail systems are still open, so there's a fine mix of what is open and what isn't. We still have staff working. They're not entirely stopped, but we are still doing the base level of maintenance. That doesn't end, but just those seasonal workers that, for example, maintaining the aquatic center, the center's closed, so they temporarily don't have work to perform.
Yeah, but in the summer, things grow.
Right.
A lot faster than the winter, and we're going to keep the grass mowed and the weeds from taking over. I imagine we're going to have to figure out some adjustments.
Absolutely, yes.
All right.
Is the golf course making money?
Well, people are also not using the golf course either, because I don't believe that's considered an essential service. So, but
oh yes, it
you can
is.
social distance, I suppose, on a golf course.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, we had a question here I'm going to read from member On Lee. Has Clackamas County applied for any funding or grants from SAFE, state, or federal to reimburse costs related to COVID-19? And then you have Commissioner Humbertson.
Hello.
So I can.
And then Sean.
Thank you.
Okay.
Elizabeth was going to answer that.
Okay.
Yeah, I can address that. Thank you, Anli. We are tracking all of our expenditures, as I mentioned earlier, and this is to identify those that we can seek grants for and reimbursement. We do have a team of grant folks in the finance department that are actively seeking and reporting on what grants are available. And so it's very imperative that we are tracking diligently and timely for our expenses so we can apply for all of those that are available to us. So thank you for asking. I should have mentioned that.
There's also potential federal relief through the Stafford Act. The governor has declared a state of emergency, as has the president. So some expenses will be eligible for FEMA reimbursement if they have any money left after all this.
All right, so Commissioner Humbertson, then Sean Caldwell, and then Commissioner Savas, and then Jan Lee.
Just in a follow-up from a comment from a couple of days ago, we have our regular staff, and if they are unable to work in their normal jobs, some of them may be willing to work in some of the temporary jobs, whether it's in our parks or other places like that. So before we go out and hire temporary people, if there's a way to put our permanent employees continuing to work, I would advise that we consider that.
Right.
Yes, and we have done quite a bit of redeployment, as we're calling it, reutilizing and repurposing our staff as we can to keep them working.
Good.
Go ahead, Sean.
My question was similar. It has to do with whether or not you intend to hire back the tourism staff when circumstances change, and whether or not you've notified them, and any other programs that are in a similar position, and whether or not you formally notified them of that. That makes a difference in their unemployment.
Yes, the intent, I'll say my intent is to bring those employees back when we have the funding back for that department. We don't know when that will be. I hope it's soon. It could be a year or two to recoup the losses in revenue. All of those employees, except for 2 in that department, are represented employees. So they have rights under their collective bargaining agreement, which they have been notified about in their notice. So yes, we will do our best to help these good people on a personal level, on a humane level, but also their rights as represented employees.
Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, I just wanted to just point out that I think Elizabeth has just started her presentation. I do have a lot of comments about some of the funding streams. Tourism is certainly one of them, but I'm going to hold my comments until she's completed her presentation. But I just want to say that I think it's probably, I don't want to get too far off track, I guess. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay, Jan?
Yes, under the CARES Act, there's 45% of that 1.6 billion that goes to the state. 45% of the money the state gets out of that 1.6 billion goes to local governments. And I'm wondering, Gary, if the state has made any contact with counties under 500,000 to talk about how that might be distributed.
Yes, in fact, several of our commissioners have been involved with several phone calls with Governor Brown on behalf of counties and cities to do just that. So I know Commissioner Fisher, I think Commissioner Savas, Commissioner Schrader, all of them actually. And our county just wrote a letter to the governor about that. So yes, we've been in contact with the governor and our congressional delegation to help make sure there's support coming from both the state and the federal governments to local governments.
All right, back to you, Elizabeth.
Okay. Well, we knew that was a current topic we wanted to make sure that we discussed. And Commissioner Savas, I hope we get to your comments as well as budget, as they are related, either through the COVID-19 or just through the budget as we continue through. The next on our agenda is the general fund forecast. This was your attachment C. And I wasn't planning on spending a lot of time on this, as there were not many changes since we met at the end of February. I did want to keep it in our forefront, though, as this is a document that we see as a living document, as we put changes as they become known into this, so we can keep moving toward the future of a stabilized budget system that we have for the county. We did update the reduction that we put in for this coming budget year 2021 of $6.5 million. What this does not reflect is a decision that followed the printing of this, is that we are pulling back contingencies from various departments that were general fund funded, and that brought back an additional, let's see, 2.7 million back to the general fund. And what we're doing here is we will we'll always have, our goal is to always have a balanced budget, but our long-term goal, and on this forecast is 5 years looking, is that we get to a stabilization where our revenues are not underwater from our expenditures. Our expenditures continue to grow at a different rate than our revenues, and we want to stabilize that. So as we are making these incremental reductions in our budgets and programs and spending, we can bring those in line. Someone had asked, I think it was Tom, about the equal pay. We do have asterisks there that we do have a reserve set aside. We won't know until the end of June how much that will initially cost. They're doing the study, and we're to get that report at the end of this fiscal year, and then we can put some solid numbers into the forecast. One of the changes we did make, we have the ERP financial software new system in there starting in the 3rd year. The last finance forecast report you saw was for the 1st year. We were anticipating moving quicker on getting a new financial software. We are delaying that, as I've shared with you, that we are making substantial changes within the finance department in our practices, working with all departments to bring monthly closing, which will provide timely and accurate financials. I'm sorry, Tom?
I said, here, here. I just found out you didn't have monthly closing. I got to admit, I was shocked.
Yeah, well, thank you for interrupting, because sometimes if I go too long, I need someone to break up my monologue. So we pushed that out as we have a lot of work to do internally with our practices. One of them I will share with you. Our accounts receivable team has really made great strides already. We've gone to an online electronic invoicing system countywide, and that was rolled out this week. Very proud of them for taking the initiative on that, and that will allow for us to get faster, timely accounts receivable into our financial software system. And what that does is that tells us, how much revenue is out there that we are anticipating to bring in. So it was against, what I wanted. I, want to move quicker, but I think we have a lot of groundwork to do to be solid in moving to that next step. So we do have that, the enterprise reporting system, our financial system, projected out a couple more years. So any questions on the forecast or anything that you'd like to discuss other than those, or in addition to what I've brought up?
Commissioner Savas, then Commissioner Humbertson, then Tom Feely.
Yeah, Elizabeth, just getting back to the attachment C, the forecast that's in the packet. I appreciate adding the numbers of the FTE in there. And I know you didn't spend a lot of time in it because we're in this situation or period of time of trying to assess things. But with the goal of trying to get to a sustainable budget, let's just say pre-COVID, Gary had, with the hiring freeze and so on, and not replacing some of the employees through attrition as attrition occurs. I was expecting that maybe the forecast of the FTEs might be reflective that, so I would expect maybe to see a small decline in each budgeted year forecast out in the FTE in anticipation of what that natural attrition rate is through the county. So on one hand, at the very top in red, it says you have the 7% vacancy assumption. So it looks like it's more of a maintenance or maintaining the 7% vacancy rate as opposed to the accrual of the hiring freeze incorporated with that. So that would be more of a steady decline. I did want to just say that I know we're still sorting it out, and I don't know how long we anticipate that hiring freeze being in place, or the level of what that hiring freeze looks like. So I just wanted to point that out. Earlier, when we talked about the tourism department, and of course they saw a significant or experiencing a significant loss of income. But just as probably the state will see a significant amount, not as drastic, but employment taxes, obviously, I think Tom mentioned that earlier. But because the departments that rely on those state grants and those federal grants, again, federal taxes, employee taxes, and state employee taxes, I'm extremely concerned and about how we are going to navigate that. It'd be great to have a crystal ball. We don't. But I think we're going to have to be, as best we can, somewhat surgical in everything that we do, because we have income that's based on fees. For example, we have income that's based on lottery. That's seen a big hit. We have income that's, of course, talk about tourism. We have our rate-based, like the districts, for example, that they're West, for example, they have a fee that every ratepayer pays. So they're not as impacted, other than maybe those who can't afford to make the payments. We have market-based incomes. We have property tax incomes, and we and again, back to the employment taxes, a lot of grants, and then we have some payments. But each department has a mixture or one or the other of those. And if I missed one, I'd like to hear anyone who has any other income streams that are significant that we don't take into account. But that puts a tremendous amount of thought and responsibility and thinking from a strategy standpoint as to how we program our budget going forward. And I just see that question to either Gary or Elizabeth is that do you have a plan to take those approaches? And I just want to just add, I really see a lot of work that I think staff's going to have to do. We're going to have to rely on our staff on this budget more than we ever have, as opposed to the budget committee trying to calibrate, so to speak, in this with all these unknowns in this time.
Yeah, Commissioner Savage, you are spot on. What we've done is asked, and this was a couple weeks ago, is we talked with all the departments and asked them to review all of their revenue streams for this current year that they have, and rewrite basically their year-end projections. So we had already had the year-end projections and their first drafts already done, and then we had to go back and ask them to open those up and look at them again to address the changes you spoke of and mentioned. That there's not a department that hasn't been impacted by this COVID-19, and it's hard for this forecast to reflect that. That's why I'm kind of like, we can talk about the forecast, but it's really right now such a moving target. But the departments have done a great job looking at those revenue streams, being honest about what's not there, what's going to change to get to a year-end projection. And then also for July 1st, what is that going to look like? So now we're taking that crystal ball and trying to create some sort of projection based on the information we know today. And we've asked them to, put a shot in the dark and see what that's going to look like. And we know that'll change. And as the commissioners have, full authority after July 1 to make additional changes. We'll talk about that, in our budget approach next. But yes, this is what we're living right now. This budget document, our current year and next year, is a very moving target and very alive. And I've got the trash is being picked up behind me. I'm sorry if you're hearing that. So that helps that, yes, we are examining everything.
All right, Commissioner Humbertson.
Yeah, one question and one comment. I understand that Director Schmidt has asked the departments to look at various budget cutting scenarios in their departments and in their revenue streams, so that if, say, 10% occurs in X department, this is, in advance what you can do and what you need to do and what you're going to recommend to the County Board of Commissioners. But to some degree, it's reactionary. I mean, you can plan for what may happen in different ways, but in the final analysis is the board would have to react to the actual income that comes in. Am I missing anything on that?
I think you are spot on as well. We are making a plan. We have reductions in our projections, proposed budget for next year, to bring the general fund expenses down. But then we're also looking at what do we do if this continues? And so your responses after July 1 will be reactionary because we'll have more information. We'll know where we're at, but at least we'll have some idea of a plan ahead that we can change, modify, or accept as they are.
I always like to use the analogy that in military terms, you have a plan of battle going forward if you're going to go to war. But of course, the enemy doesn't read your plan, so you have to be flexible and have the ability to make changes as quickly as possible. The one question that I did have is you made the comment that you had set aside funds for the Equal Pay Act's adjustments, but you didn't put anything in the line. And I was wondering about, do you have a figure as to how much you've actually set aside for that once we know what it is?
Well, we have some reserves that we moved out of another fund into the general fund reserves. And so we're just identifying those. It's about 2 million, but we do not have an idea. I don't know what that's going to look like. The impact could be quite severe. It could make a huge impact to our, salaries across the board, or could be minimal. Depends on the plan and how we roll this out.
Okay, the reason I asked the question because I'm looking at the attachment C, and there was nothing put in there, but you did say that there was money set aside. So what I just heard was that you've set that money aside in the general fund.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but I didn't want to commit myself to what the expenses could be, so we've left that open.
Okay. I just kind of expected to see a number sitting there. Not that it would stay the same because you obviously don't know what the impact is, but now that I know where it's sitting, that's fine.
All right.
Thank you.
Tom?
Thank you. I expressed some concerns to Elizabeth already, but I'd like to share them to the group this morning. I heard her when she said the forecast hasn't changed, but what has changed is the whole COVID environment. And I'm concerned about property tax delinquencies because I know from my own experience, and there are other citizen members who've done budget for as long as I have, that in times of Great Recession, the delinquency rate goes up as people are unable to pay their property taxes. So assuming the standard 2% delinquency rate, I think is very optimistic in the climate we have today going into when the bills go out in the fall. So I think you need to look at that, see what other jurisdictions are doing. And I understand they're just starting to put their budgets together. I'm also concerned about an ongoing 7% vacancy assumption over the 5 years of the forecast. I think that's overly optimistic too. I think departments are going to be looking to cut vacant positions. I mean, I think you're going to want them to cut vacant positions, not filled positions. So I can see that not being sustainable for 7 years. And then a question to Elizabeth, can we get the report that was done on the ERP? Some of us have lived through and survived ERP implementation. I'd be just curious to read that. And then I also asked if there's anything in for the courthouse. It wasn't addressed, and I think the answer was no. And that's correct. There's nothing embedded in the financial plan about courthouse expenses.
That is correct.
Okay. And then related to the courthouse too, my concern is the state going to honor their commitment? I mean, they're going to get hit horribly. They don't have a number yet because things are developing by the day, but that's a concern. And I think that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you. So I was going to talk about my concern about assuming a 7% vacancy savings. I think I mentioned this last time, never anticipating we would have a COVID crisis. But when our budget is a plan, it's what we want our government to do, and having budgeting based on positions that are optimal is really good when you then have a crisis and a fiscal challenge, because that savings can be built in right there. And because you basically have over budgeted what you actually need. It's like padding your budget and not spending it, which makes me feel much more comfortable if we did have more room, because we don't know how severe this economic downturn is going to be, and we may really need to dig deep. And it just concerns me. I just know when we had the Great Recession back in 2010, utilizing those vacancy savings is so much of how state government balanced their department budgets. And I don't like that we are already budgeting without those. We don't have those vacancies within our line items. And I was just studying as Paul was talking, if you look at 2018 and 19 in personnel, there's 43 million, and then that jumped by 7 million to 1920, because that's when we realized we were not sustainable. And then it went down to we got it to 46, and then it's going up ever so slightly, our personnel services, for the next 5 years for the forecast. And so I think we really have taken into account reducing the personnel costs. But lastly, the thing that I wanted to mention as well is I think having an economist or contracting with an economist to really look at forecasting. I don't know if we could borrow Multnomah County's economist, since that person is already immersed in the region and local governments, but having a crystal ball isn't something that anyone can be, and certainly finance department can't have a crystal ball, but economists, that's kind of what they try to do with all of their models and the way that they think about things. And I would really like us to have access to an economist.
The city of Portland has an economist too. I would reach out to them. They're already projecting $100 million shortfall in their general fund for next year.
I'm sorry, Tom, who was that?
City of Portland.
Yeah.
They're expecting $100 million shortfall, and they do have an economist that does their general fund projections. So I would reach out to them, see what they're assuming, especially on property taxes.
So we already have, and Multnomah County is willing to share their economists with Clackamas County and Washington County. She told us she would supply that information.
Good.
So I'm comfortable that we have access.
Good.
Yeah, and Commissioner Fisher, I'd like to, thank you for that, bringing up the economist. Blaze Riggins, who I introduced earlier, is our senior budget analyst. He has already, right off his early days here at Clackamas, reached out and has developed a relationship and contact with the Multnomah County economists. So he is in conversation with him, which I am grateful for, and keeps us apprised of what he learns. Also, I'd like to just share a bit the difference between this forecast and using that 7% vacancy as forecasting actuals for the years compared to when we do budget. So Commissioner Fisher, I appreciate what you're saying about that, that cushion as you're going through the year. And so you'll find that actually in the budget document that those positions are budgeted. However, when we look at a forecast, we know that there is turnover, there's attrition, and so we do find, as you see at the actual for 18-19, it was only 43.5 million, but we budgeted at 50 for the next year. So we do budget more than we know that'll actually come to fruition on those personnels. So year to year, you will see a bit of that, not built-in savings, but being optimistic that we'll have those positions filled. And then it's just timing of getting them filled, and then the dollars actually spent.
All right, Chair On had a question, so let me unmute her. On, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I don't have a question. I'm
Oh,
sorry if
yeah.
I hit the raise hand accidentally.
Okay, take care of that. Chair Bernard.
As I mentioned, Kafori already shared some information, and I assume that Blaze got that from their economist. If not, we'll make sure you do. We're also makes it more challenging is that we have no idea what the federal government or state government is going to give us. We have no idea. And what we get back from our emergency operations center, we have no idea. We think, I remember hearing 75 cents to a dollar. I don't know if that's real or not, but
it's a long process too.
What's that?
I say it takes a long time to get
Yes,
federal
yeah, it could be 1 to 2 years before we get that
and
money.
they'll come in and audit it. And, yeah.
So we're working with the court on the courthouse with the legislature or with the judge in charge, and we've asked to delay it. As has Lynn County. I think Lynn County is the other one, asked to delay it a year. And they seem to have the money already sort of set aside. So we're not going to jump at this. And we're also looking at a P3 partnership. We haven't made a final decision on that, but so that's why I feel comfortable with how we're doing this right now. Anyway, that's it.
Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, I just want to get clarification back to the $2 million set aside for the equal pay. I just want to and then going forward in our discussions, I just want to ask if that was one-time $2 million or if that was a budgetary ongoing $2 million fine or adjustment. I think it's important going forward that we talk about these monies as we look at the budget as the one-time money fines and the ongoing. The other thing I wanted is relevant to the conversation we're just having right now is that every month that we see or the state sees an employment loss like they do, that's somewhat calculable, and we don't know what the normalization or the phasing will do and how much time that'll take. But for example, if we went 6 more months with the employment rate like it is, that's going to be devastating at the state level and the federal level. So I'm sure that the economist and the forecasting and the discipline that are all talking with one another. So I appreciate having those people in the loop. But I think that's going to be part of their challenge as well, is to figure out how do we phase back the state, or how the state takes that role and how they implement that will have a monetary impact when it comes to our income stream. So I'm sure you all know that, but I think it's worth for anyone who's listening to understand how much unknowns and uncertainty there is going forward.
Elizabeth, we have a little more than a half hour.
Yeah.
We need you to finish your prod for us.
Will do. So
Okay.
I'll just, I'll wrap up this agenda item with a response to Commissioner Savas on the funding that is identified that can be used for the Equal Pay Act. And that is one time. We do not have an ongoing budget for that. That would be included in, the various departments, and then would be reflected from those funding streams as well from those. That would not be included on this general fund. We would have to look at what the general fund impact will be. And hopefully that will be here soon for us to bring to you. So I'd like to move to number 5, which is budget approach for 2021. As we've talked about already, we have, there's not a handout on that. These next items are really just discussion and to bring information to you. So our budget approach was to have cuts, request cuts from the departments, all departments of 5, 10, and 15%. Those were reviewed and we've identified those. So in the balanced proposed budget that you'll receive for our budget committee meeting in May, it will include those from them. Also, we've made a plan as we are making multiple changes within our accounting structure and department. We are pulling all general fund contingencies into the general fund. And what that means is when departments that receive general fund need to tap into a contingency, it will go through the commissioners, the Board of Commissioners, through a supplemental request, rather than going within each department separately. So that'll bring more transparency to perhaps a program change or an unexpected expenditure or change in funding streams, those things that we can be more of aware of as a county. That was initially here, that's 2.7 million that was brought back into the general fund, and that'll be part of the beginning balance for 2021. Let's see, what else? We are looking to add more transparency into our budget for you. We have a department that is called non-departmental, and it houses a lot of county-wide expenses, and we want to really identify any of those that are related to a particular department to bring those and have them directly appropriated within those departments. Even though they're county-wide, we want to identify them so we can actually look through programs and departments how much that is costing for the county as a whole. Also, the chart of accounts, that'll be a huge change for the accounting structure and for the reporting. We'll be able to combine. Right now we have 3 to 6 different chart of accounts that have grown over the years. We'll bring those together, and so as we are working on our performance clackamas, we'll be able to do better reports for you, more timely. I've already mentioned our electronic invoicing, and we'll have some additional changes in our accounts payable process for the county, which will make that more streamlined. We're asking and working with all the departments for more timely submission. So when we get our budget completed, we'll have better year-to-date numbers to line up against our projections in the budget. And also, I'll be working with Gary on how we recognize temporary employees for the transparency aspect. Right now, our temporary employees are not FTEs. And so we do know that we utilize them, as we've mentioned before, in our Park and Recreations District, that we want to recognize what does it take to operate a department as a whole, including those temporary employees. And I think that just offers us a better picture and a story when we make changes to include them in that. So those are some of the impacts, and the approach that we're taking on this budget year is what is it going to look like, and how are we going to report better to you as a commission group and a budget committee. Any thoughts on any of that or questions?
Sean.
Thank you. I did express to Elizabeth my concerns about some of the overspending. We heard from the audit report that there were 5 instances in the last fiscal year. And I believe that there was some overspending of appropriations in the years before that. And Elizabeth let me know about the monthly reporting to the departments, which is great. That's going to be a huge help. I'm hoping there's also analysis coming from budget staff that is a second pair of eyes on what the departments are doing. There shouldn't ever be overspending appropriations, because there are tools, things that you can do to change the appropriation level before year end. So I'm hoping that that's something that we won't have to see in the audit reports going forward.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And this is a countywide change that we are working on, and that is the timeliness of getting the information in collectively from all the departments so that it can be recorded into our financial software. And you're right. The budget analysts are and will work with and continue to work with the departments on those monthly reports. Our challenge has been is getting timely information. And so as we are making these process changes and system changes for accounts receivable and accounts payable, we'll have our intent is to get that information from the departments faster so we can get it into the systems timely. So when we do hit the end of the fiscal year, we have that data so that we know, are we close to the appropriations? Unfortunately,
and, you know, that's
yeah.
as much an art as it is a science.
You bet. Yeah.
Right. Go ahead with your question.
Elizabeth, I have a question for you. So you mentioned the county doesn't close finance monthly now, and you're trying to work on achieve it. I just wondering, do you have a timeline on when you would have the actual number available to the budget committee?
For the current year end?
Yes.
That would be when we close for the audit.
So not until the year end?
It most likely will be September.
Okay. All right. Cool. Thank you.
All right. Tom.
Thank you. You know, I'm looking at the budget calendar, and we've got 2 days to approve the budget. I expressed my concern at the last meeting that what was on that calendar is inadequate. Now it's even less. So I just got to go on record. I don't know how we could possibly do this. I mean, we've taken 2 hours this morning just sort of talking around the budget, not really a specific budget. So that remains a huge concern for me.
I agree. Absolutely.
That is on the agenda. We can move down to
Sorry, I
6.
didn't mean to jump the gun.
No, that's fine. That's a topic. Absolutely. So our budget presentation format, we do have proposed on the budget calendar as being abbreviated. I understand, I've actually watched a few of the videos from last year of each of the departments and their presentations before all of you. Our proposal is to simplify that, to provide you with all the same information that you've had in the past on the performance measures, the details from the individual programs within each of the departments, and then prepare a PowerPoint consistently through all the departments for the entire county, really bringing consistency and one Clackamas County to you. That would be 6 slides for each department, and we would present the information condensed, but very telling and specific to the health and financial stability of each of the departments and their programs, as best we know as of April 30th. Of course, we're writing this in the midst of many changes, and there'll be changes even after April 30th. So we want to bear in mind that the budget is a plan and it's moving, and it will continue. The information we get will continue to move after we have put the document together and presented it to you. What we want to offer is a balanced, stabilized budget for adoption, for approval by the budget committee, and then for adoption, knowing that after July 1, as we have more information, and we've talked about it'll be more reactionary, but that we would make necessary changes as they become apparent and identified after July 1. So not to just push through a budget, but be very intentional on the information that we discuss as a budget committee on the county's expenditures and plans to the best of our knowledge at the moment we have it.
All right, Tom.
I just want to state that while analysis of the numbers is great, I'm really interested in the service impacts of what the reductions are. I mean, real honest service reduction. Who is impacted by a particular reduction, not just that it's a 3% or a 15% reduction.
Yes. Absolutely.
Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments. I mean, if we just for a moment think back a couple months ago, prior to this COVID-19 crisis, we were talking about budget process, and my experience with the county as a commissioner and my previous public budgeting going back into the 90s. So I've been doing public budgeting for a while, but particularly the last 9-10 years, it has always seemed that when the staff prepared the budget and we got the big budget book and the budget document, we really didn't move very much or change very, very little. And in years we had, you know, money, a little bit of discretionary money to make adjustments here and there. And there was value perhaps in trying to weigh some of that extra money and maybe adjust those budgets and listen to the staff as far as balancing what all those needs are. This year, and so having that said, the last couple years, we haven't had very much money, or we thought we had money at one point where we really didn't have money. But I guess the process has been somewhat, I'm just speaking personally, that the fact that we really spend so much time on it and we make very little change or no change seems to me that I'm looking for where the value added is and what the messaging really is. And I've had my experience has been somewhat of a disconnect between what we actually perhaps were presented in the budget versus maybe what the reality really was. And that gets back to the budget deficit that I was speaking to a couple of years ago and going forward. So again, 2-3 months ago, we were looking at, well, can we get to a sustainable budget? Now we've got even more chaos than ever. And I think we're going to have to rely on somewhat the seat of the pants of the forecasters and the economists and our staffing to look at the funding streams and present us a document that we can do the best we can with, knowing there's no extra money. I think it's important to know what those budget impacts are for everyone. And all those services, which just pains me in every regard. I really can't think of anything that anyone's going to garner any comfort with as far as cuts, because we really have been trimming a lot of fat here and there out of the county. And so I think we got a pretty lean budget prior to this. So going forward, I don't know, I'm probably going to rely more than ever on our staff to really kind of give us their best shot at trying to put together a budget document we can get to meet the state deadline, and yet knowing that next year or the next fiscal year, we're going to be making adjustments on the fly probably every month, kind of readjusting to the situation of the COVID crisis. So I just wanted to just kind of put that out there, that I've had this ongoing discomfort with not really accomplishing very much in changes to the budget when we spent almost 2 weeks with it, and how we make changes in forward. I don't have a solution. I don't have a prescription, but I think we have to rely on staff more than ever.
Right. Sean.
Thanks. I wanted to echo what Tom was saying about, the budget discussion being about more than numbers. I think when we're talking about 4 slides, really you're talking about the budgetary impact as translated into dollars. But for me, that simply is a reflection of what's going on out in the community. And I think it takes more than 2 days to help your citizen members understand what the programs are accomplishing, whether or not those are reaching the board's and the county's far-reaching goals. whether it's the most effective use of dollars under circumstances like this. And as far as changes, you know, partly what we're doing is making changes, but partly what we're doing is representing the citizens of Clackamas County and understanding what the board is doing with their resources and whether or not it's the most effective use to get the community to where, you know, we're healthy, safe, happy, and have a robust economy. So that's hard to do in 2 days.
Commissioner Fisher.
Yeah, I appreciate everybody's comments. And, you know, we are always talking about how the COVID crisis is so scary and detrimental, and we just don't know what's going to happen. But there are some things that we know that are happening. And one thing is that the parts of our safety net that are most important are rising to the top of where government needs to invest its resources. So what I'm really hoping that we can do as a county government is really look at what we need to be providing and make even greater investments where we know we have needs, which are absolutely rising to the top. We also know that Metro has a homeless services measure that is going to be on the ballot in May. You never know what's going to happen, but polling suggests that it is going to pass. And with that, we have a huge opportunity to take even the individuals right now that have been homeless, that are now staying in hotels with vouchers. If we decided that we were going to improve how we are working with our safety net, we could rely on those future dollars and make investments right after that passes as a county government to make sure that we are doing what we know works for people in our community.
All right, Jan.
Yes, I agree with Commissioners Fisher and Savas. Last year or last time was my first budget hearing process. And I think adding some uniformity to the process and more conciseness would be very helpful. Some of it seemed to drone on unnecessarily, and having Elizabeth work with the department heads to make it a more viable presentation, I think would help all of us. And in addition to the 4 slides that were mentioned, I wonder if we could add one that would talk about further impacts that the budget implies, more of a personal touch, perhaps.
Okay, Commissioner Humbertson.
Thank you. Well, I think Tom raised what really is a process question more than anything else. And I would like to offer a suggestion. If the staff who are going to present the slides that you were talking about can be on like say a 15-minute notice situation, what we can do is we get a presentation, we take whatever time that particular presentation requires for our team members here to ask their questions and get answers. And then if there's not anybody waiting on deck, within 15 minutes, they should be able to be ready and on deck, because we've already got the PowerPoint presentations ready to go. And then keep the schedule open beyond 2 days. If we get it done in 2 days, that's fine. If it does take longer, we've built in the flexibility in our schedule to make sure that all of the members of this team have an opportunity to ask their questions. I'd call it a compromise position. We don't go for a full 7 or 10 days, but it may take more than 2. So if we block that time out, we know it's available if we need it. And if it takes 4 days, then we're done. And if it takes 2 days, we're done. Or if it takes all 7 or 8 days, then it does. But block it out so that it's available if it's needed. That's my suggestion.
Right. Chair Bernard.
Ken took that right out of my mouth. That's what I was going to say. If we need more than 2 days, we can add them. I've always felt, so just to make sure Paul knows, I've done this for 20 years. As the mayor, I had a great teacher, Mike Swanson, who was the first administrator of Clackamas County. I've always mentioned budgets go from this to this to this constantly as people change. I've always felt the presentations were not as valuable as the conversation, the questions after the presentation. So I think what we need to do is write our questions down during the presentations, ask them. If there isn't time, then we bring them back. And that's where you add additional meetings. And, you know, I think it's also our responsibility to take the time to dig where digging is necessary into particular budgets. The sheriff is the largest impact on the general fund, and the sheriff is one that we really need to dig into, and as well as Gary's, because he's a big spender. And I want to thank all you guys in Hawaii. Pass me a martini.
No.
All right. Thanks.
Tom?
Yeah, I like Ken's idea of adding some flexibility in case we need it. I mean, I think in all likelihood, we're going to need it to balance. You know, like Jim's idea about, you know, planning ahead on the budgets that we know are going to take some time, 3H, the sheriff, and have them there so they can answer our questions. I mean, I'm not advocating for a 7 to 10 day cookie cutter presentation for everyone. I don't think anyone would find that beneficial. So if we can, you know, target those areas that are, you know, heavily impacted by what's going on in the world right now, as well as heavy users of general funds, I think that would be great.
I hope that helps.
Yeah, Kevin, any more? Any additional?
There's not at this moment.
Well, this is wonderful input and feedback. Appreciate all those, and I like the idea of, well, one, yes, we want to be flexible for you. We want to provide concise, clear information so you feel armed and informed to move forward. And yes, we want to be flexible for adding a day as necessary. We do have Friday. I don't know how you feel about coming in on a Friday if we extend out to then. The challenge is the public hearing. I think I'd need to get some advisement on that, because I tentatively have that scheduled for Wednesday evening. We would do the districts, the component units on Tuesday, and then the Clackamas County budget beginning on Wednesday. And then Wednesday evening would be the public hearing. And then Thursday, the deliberation with those questions. I also want to add that I would like to, and I wanted to speak to each of the resident committee members from our public, that I want to get to know you, each of you better, and have you get to know me better, that I could spend some one-on-one time with you after the proposed budgets do go out, that maybe 3 days after I could set a time and we could go over some particular questions with you as well. And commissioners, that also would go for you too. So does that sound like it would be a workable if we extended through Friday? To be determined. We do have the next week. We've got the adoption scheduled for June 18th. So we do have some time available. Our limitations would only be to make sure that we have time for the budget team to put the final document together for presentation to the commissioners.
Right. Commissioner Savas.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Now that we've transitioned to the calendar, and that's where the discussion is right now, in light of all the decisions that are being made at the state level and at the federal level, the calendar currently reflects basically a timing that we've done in the past, right? When things were more certain than they are today. And it just seems, my question is, I don't want to throw, a wrench into the works here, but it just seems as though that what we know on May 1st is going to change on May 15th. That's going to change on May 30th. So it seems as though that moving closer to the budget deadline of, June 30th and making those decisions or adjustments as late as possible with the latest and greatest information might give us a better product. But it seems as though that this calendar is a typical calendar for us, and these are untypical times. I'm just wondering if there's any, and I don't know the timing and sequencing of what happens between the time the budget committee finishes its work and the final budget's approved by the Board of County Commissioners. But it seems as though that the calendar doesn't reflect these unusual times. I just want to, is there any consideration maybe that we might want to just not stall for the sake of stalling, but getting the latest and greatest information to input in these budget decisions we're making?
And it is all timing. The funny thing is, a month ago when actually back in February, I think our initial calendars, we had moved everything up. We were trying to get it done earlier. And then we did push it back to where it has been in the past, pushing it out as far as we can. And we do feel that these dates are about as far out as I would risk. There is a lot of work to be done that is behind the scenes following discussions and approvals and adoptions to meet our Oregon budget law guidelines. And so I'd like not to push these out any further. As I mentioned earlier, we do have, and it shows in the calendar, April 30th, we really need to have final decisions and proposed budgets from the departments by then in order to put together the documents for you as a budget committee to review. So that timing, we did go over it quite a bit as a team and deliberated what could we allow as the most time, pushing it as far out as possible. So thank you for that consideration.
Jan?
Yes, as you know, Governor's Executive Order 2016 extends the timeline for any local government that chooses to go further. The May forecast for the legislature will come out May 20th, and there'll be a legislative session within a couple weeks after that. So there will be some major decisions regarding state funds, and it may be that the county would like to look at extending their budget timeline as currently allowed because of the virus.
Commissioner Humbertson, did you have anything?
No, just chewing on that a little bit. I guess I would defer to Elizabeth and ask what she thinks in terms of how it affects what she has to do on our behalf.
I'm sorry, what the state is proposing? I'm not clear.
What Jan was proposing with respect to the state's loosening up of the rules.
I think that's within what the state is. That won't impact Oregon budget law.
So my memory is that the governor's order the deadline is still by June 30th for governments, that the relaxation is with the public meeting requirements, but the deadline is still June 30th. I will read that again, but that was my memory. So
yeah, I believe that is correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in your current law, you don't have the authority to spend $1 without an adopted budget. So
correct. Yeah. And we did actually, the three counties, Multnomah, Washington County, and Clackamas County, did put together a letter and send to our state governor requesting an extension on that June 30th date. But however, we are tied to that. And as Tom pointed out, we wouldn't be able to function on July 1st if we weren't able to get that the budget adopted by the commissioners by June 3.
So
I also recall from the governor's executive order that there was a time extension to be able to expend dollars prior to the budget approval. So if you guys could just take another look at it and
Sure.
see if what legal counsel has said to me is correct or not.
Will do.
Commissioner Humberton.
yeah, Elizabeth, maybe you and Gary want to put your heads together on the idea too, that after we adopted the budget and given how reactionary we're going to have to be going forward after July 1, because we don't know entirely what the state's going to be doing, et cetera. Maybe a budget review at least once a month. I don't know if that's too burdensome for you and your team or not, but I know we're going to be in this reactionary mode, and I'd hate to be 3 months out and then have a big problem as opposed to 1 month and have a small problem.
Yes, absolutely. Just to let you know, to share, one challenge we do have with that is the grant funding. We'll need to be very proactive on that because it's such a delayed process. We gather all of our expenses and then we forward them on for grant reimbursement. So we need to be very aware of what those grant fundings are going to be like before we expend those funds and seek reimbursement. So absolutely, and we will be looking at this very closely. And as I talked, I'm hoping that we're going to get to a point where we're going to have those financial components available timely so we can look at actual expenditures and the revenue due. And so that plays right into the changes we're making within the county.
Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, well, it sounds like getting back to the agenda that we've maybe are okay with the budget calendar. So I wanted to take the last few minutes and maybe ask Gary a question, or maybe it's Elizabeth a question, but it seems to me that there's quite a bit of agreement that the state's going to see at least a 25% hit in state revenues, okay? So if we are grant-based and that translates into a 25% cut of our grant streams, funding streams that come to the county, and earlier you mentioned, I think what you had done prior to this COVID thing was instruct staff for these 5, 10, 15% cuts. In light of that number being 25% or higher, for example, and let alone all the other funding streams we discussed earlier, what's your approach right now or thoughts as far as the level of cuts or any instructions or anything that you feel looking forward? Gary, I'd really like to hear your input.
Gary, do you want to speak to that, or would you like me to?
I'll let you start and then I can wrap it up.
Okay. Yeah, Gary has been very proactive with the county on that fact and the knowledge that we don't know what after July 1st is going to bring. So in addition to our current proposed budget that we are building now for 2021, the departments are also looking at these potential cuts that we may have in all of the county's revenue streams. So all departments, not just general fund, but all departments, and to plan for perhaps a 20 to 30% reduction in revenue, which would directly go to those services. So those will not be presented as part of the budget plan because we are not looking to implement those, but they are something that we want to be realistic and we want to plan appropriately for as best we can. So the teams are looking at those and considering it and thinking about what if this continues and the state does need to drastically reduce the funding in many areas that the county is providing services.
Well said.
Yes. Any more questions?
I do not see any, Mr. Chair.
Are you guys ready to call our day?
So if I may on the calendar, so what I recommend is we will start the budget hearings on Tuesday, May 26th. And please plan for that Friday, the 29th. The next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Just please clear your calendars for those 2 weeks. We'll take the time you need to complete the discussion you need. We'll, as Commissioner Hummerson recommended, we'll attempt to do it as efficiently as possible, but we'll take the time you need. So just hold your calendars from the week of May 25th and the week of June 1st, everyone, please.
So the
Gary?
26th is the service districts, though, for these citizens, for us.
Thank you. I apologize. You're right. So Tuesday, May 26th will be the service special district budget committee meetings.
My neighbor will be there.
Yes. So
Okay.
for this committee, you will start on Wednesday,
Right.
May 27th. Thank you, Tom. Thank you for that clarity.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification.
Hey, Gary?
Yes.
The other thing with, if teams are on deck with a 15-minute gap in there, it also gives the members of the committee a chance to get up, get a cup of coffee, use restroom and whatnot like that, and it builds in a natural break, which might be helpful to keep us going, standing in front or sitting in front of these screens all day long.
Yes, absolutely. And we are going to do these by Zoom. We have no idea if the world will be open in a month, but for now, we're going to plan to do all these committee hearings by Zoom. So they'll be online. But thank you, Ken. We'll do that.
We have 64 participants, so that's good.
Yeah.
All right.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
What presentation from department will be handed out to the budget committee in advance?
Yes, you will receive, our intention is to have in your possession on May 18th, the deck of slides for the presentations for all the departments, as well as the proposed budget detailed documentation. And that'll all be via email. And if anyone does request a hard copy of those, if we can get advance notice, but we are looking to have this all be electronic for this year. Save paper time and just that new presentation. But we are available to make hard copies. They'll be big if you do want a hard copy.
That's great. Thank you.
Any further questions?
I do not see any, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you, and we are adjourned.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.